At the very center of Northern Azure Academy, there lies a vast and magnificent square, the renowned Biming Plaza. It is said that long ago, this square was once the training ground for the North Abyss Dragon Xun'er. However, with the establishment of Northern Azure Academy, it was transformed into a plaza. Generally, such events are only held here during grand occasions. And the gathering point for the hunting war is right here. This plaza, large enough to accommodate hundreds of thousands, was today filled with an endless sea of people. The thunderous roar of the crowd reached the skies, and even 100 miles away, the noise could be clearly heard. When Chen and the others arrived, they couldn't help but click their tongues at the vast ocean of people. Truly, this is Northern Azure Academy. The group hovered in the air, gazing at Biming Plaza. In the very front of the square, there was an empty space, a stark contrast to the sea of people behind. Despite its openness, no student dared to step into it. In the center of the empty space stood a bronze statue of a massive creature. Its body resembled that of a Xun'er, but it had the claws and tail of a dragon. The image was fierce and powerful, and even though it was just a statue, it exuded an overwhelming pressure. It was this very pressure that kept the students from approaching it. Is that the guardian beast of Northern Azure Academy, the North Abyss Dragon Xun'er? Chen looked at the statue and, feeling the heavy pressure, couldn't help but mutter. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er must be an extremely terrifying existence. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er holds an extremely high status in Northern Azure Academy. Even the elder of the heavenly seat must show respect in its presence, Luo Li said softly. Chen nodded. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er must be one of the most powerful divine beasts. After cultivating for so many years, its strength would undoubtedly be immense. There are likely few who can surpass it in Northern Azure Academy. Chen shifted his gaze from the statue and looked to another part of the sky, where a cold, ominous gaze was fixed on him. It was He Yao. However, Chen only smiled faintly at He Yao's gaze. A month ago, he might have been a bit wary of He Yao, but now, that wariness had completely disappeared. If a confrontation were to happen now, the outcome would no longer be something He Yao could control. He Yao, seeing Chen's calm expression, grew even colder. He quickly looked away, but Chen knew that with He Yao's temperament, he wouldn't let things go easily during the hunting war. Just as Chen shifted his focus away from He Yao, a sudden sound of wind came from behind, accompanied by a familiar fluctuation of spiritual energy. It's Li Xiantong. Chen was quite familiar with that spiritual energy fluctuation. Without even turning around, he knew who was coming. He tilted his head slightly and saw Li Xiantong and a group of people flying over. Li Xiantong's figure stopped next to Chen and Luo Li. His eyes first glanced at Luo Li with a somewhat complicated look, then turned to Chen, his gaze flashing with surprise. You've gotten stronger. If I hadn't improved, how could I dare come here? Chen smiled. There was no arrogance in his tone, but neither was he being overly humble. He knew that when facing someone like Li Xiantong, showing too much deference would only make him look down on you. It seems you're here for the hunting war. Li Xiantong smiled faintly and said, if we meet in the hunting ground, I won't be mentioning the 3 moves pact anymore. That's exactly what I'm thinking, Chen said, staring directly at Li Xiantong, nodding. The students behind Li Xiantong frowned when they saw how Chen wasn't giving an inch to Li Xiantong. In their view, although Chen had once taken 3 moves from Li Xiantong, it wasn't enough for him to think he was truly on equal footing with Li Xiantong. But even though they were displeased, none of them said anything. They merely shot Chen a hostile look, as if warning him. I'll also be participating in the hunting war. If we meet, it will be a good opportunity to test each other, Luo Li said softly. Li Xiantong's face stiffened, and he shook his head helplessly. He looked at Chen and said, I heard you dismantled the Demon Gate headquarters? Chen nodded. This matter was well known in Northern Azure Academy, so it was no surprise that Li Xiantong knew about it. A bit too arrogant, Li Xiantong commented. Chen raised an eyebrow, about to reply, but Li Xiantong seemed to smile faintly and continued, but still a man. If you hadn't done that, I might have caused some trouble for you. If you can't even protect her here, how can you talk about the future? Luo Li's eyes were soft as she gazed at the handsome profile of the young man. A smile lingered on his face, yet it was one that carried an unwavering determination, impossible to question. Li Xianong nodded slightly and said, "That He Yao guy. If I encounter him in the hunting ground, I'll deal with him." Mu Chen smiled and replied, "Senior Li Xianong can handle whoever he wants. I have no right to say otherwise. But if I run into him first, I might not leave you that chance." "Quite the confidence," Li Xianong chuckled. "Then we'll see how you perform in the hunting ground. Don't be the one who can't even reach the finish line." Mu Chen smiled and said no more, pulling Luo Li into the air, standing in midair. As time passed, more and more students gathered around. Mu Chen also saw Su Xin, Su Huang, and other powerful figures ranked highly on the heavenly ranking. Apart from these well-known figures from the Northern Azure Academy, Mu Chen sensed that in the vast sea of people, many others harbored bright, burning gazes filled with ambition. These gazes, when directed at those top 10 figures of the heavenly ranking, showed no hint of fear. Mu Chen also noticed some of these gazes and couldn't help but click his tongue in admiration. Truly, this was the Northern Azure Academy. The few who appeared on the heavenly ranking were just a small portion, while the majority hid their power, waiting for the right moment to rise. Clearly, the hunting war was the perfect opportunity to soar to new heights. Boom! As more and more students gathered, a melodious bell rang through the air, cutting through all the noise. The sound of the bell echoed across the heavens and earth, leaving a profound silence in its wake. All the students stopped talking, their eyes filled with genuine reverence as they looked towards the depths of the Northern Azure Academy. There, a massive green bird soared toward them, accompanied by a powerful wind. It quickly hovered above the only remaining open area in the plaza. Mu Chen's gaze followed the giant bird, or rather, the figures on its back. There were several elderly figures, each looking like ordinary old men. Yet, no one dared to underestimate them, for beneath their seemingly frail bodies lay unimaginable, world-destroying power. At the front of these elderly figures was a tall, middle-aged man in a green robe. His face resembled smooth jade, and his eyes sparkled like stars, drawing anyone who looked into them into a trance. It felt as if the entire world was reflected in his eyes. He smiled gently at the young students, his gaze ancient, like that of a sage who had lived through countless ages. "He is." Mu Chen's eyes grew serious as he looked at the man in the green robe. "That's the headmaster of our Northern Azure Academy, Headmaster Taizong," Li Xianong whispered. Even someone as proud as him spoke with unhidden reverence. Mu Chen nodded slightly, surprised to see the Academy's headmaster in person. Figures of his stature were not ones that students like them could easily meet. "Well, my little ones, it's been a year, and I'm pleased to see that you've all made progress in your strength." From atop the green bird, Headmaster Taizong smiled at the crowd of young students. His clear voice rang in everyone's ears, and with it, the spiritual energy within each student calmed. It was as though the sound itself had a divine quality, making everyone feel refreshed and even boosting their state, filling their energy with renewed vitality. What terrifying power, Mu Chen thought, astonished at the changes he felt within himself. What kind of strength was this? With just a single sentence, the headmaster had enhanced the condition of so many people. The sound felt as though it had adjusted their bodies, making them stronger in ways that defied comprehension. "That's Taizong divine sound," Luo Li said, her face now serious. It's said that this technique, born from a divine codex, allowed Headmaster Taizong to kill a supreme with a single shout. Killed a supreme with a shout? Mu Chen's scalp tingled. He knew it was because Headmaster Taizong had used his true strength, but still, it was incredibly terrifying. As for the hunting war, I'm sure you're all familiar with the rules, so I won't repeat them. The headmaster of Taizong Academy, with a slight smile, waved his sleeve, causing the space ahead to ripple as if it were a gigantic mirror. Within the mirror, there seemed to be a towering mountain. At the peak of the mountain, there were 3 flat-topped peaks, surrounded by clouds and mist, as if hiding some powerful presence. The many students exchanged glances. They naturally knew that only by defeating the Guardians could they undergo the final, spirit light baptism. Otherwise, all the spiritual light they had collected would be useless, completely wasted. In the past, there had usually been just one guardian, but this time it had become much more difficult, with 3. Furthermore, no one knew which 3 from the punishment palace it would be. Countless gazes were focused on the light realm, where the clouds and mist slowly dissipated, eventually revealing 3 figures sitting silently. Yet, their presence was as imposing as a fierce dragon coiling, ready to shake the heavens. Seeing their aura, even Li Xuantong's expression changed slightly. Some of the other students, particularly those with sharp senses, were visibly shaken. These 3 are the 3 generals of the punishment palace, and also the top 3 of your previous year's heavenly ranking. The headmaster's voice echoed, causing many students to gasp in surprise. This time, the 3 generals of the punishment palace were personally taking part. The difficulty had escalated. Are those the 3 generals of the punishment palace? Chen asked, his gaze serious as he looked at the 3 towering figures in the mist, their overwhelming presence apparent. Their strength was truly formidable. The final guardians are indeed them, Li Xuantong muttered, feeling the pressure himself. Even he could sense the weight of facing these 3 former, heavenly ranking top 3. And they are coming at us together. This last trial is going to be nearly impossible. Li Xuantong furrowed his brows. Although confident in his own strength, he wasn't arrogant enough to claim he could face all 3. After all, these 3 were no ordinary figures. When Li Xuantong first entered Northern Song Spiritual Academy, these 3 were figures he looked up to. According to the rules of the hunting war, no matter how much spiritual light they had gathered in the hunting grounds, if they couldn't pass this final trial, all their hard work would be for nothing. The spiritual light they had fought so hard to obtain would become useless. Likewise, the blessing of the spirit light baptism would no longer be available. This was an issue that directly impacted the interests of every student participating in the hunting war. Clearly, many students had already realized this. The atmosphere in the square became tense, with many frowning, scanning the crowd for a figure that could give them some reassurance. Why hasn't Shen Cangsheng appeared for this year's hunting war? If he doesn't show up, it's going to be nearly impossible to pass the final trial. Yeah, just relying on Li Xuantong isn't enough to deal with the 3 generals. Whispers spread throughout the square as many searched for the figure at the top of the heavenly ranking in Northern Song Spiritual Academy. Only when he appeared could they be sure of successfully undergoing the spirit light baptism. Chen remained calm, not searching around. In his view, relying on others was always the second best option. While Shen Cangsheng was indeed strong, if he returned to participate in the hunting war, it would be an inspiring event for many. However, Chen wasn't the type to place his hopes on others. Li Xuantong, too, wore a calm expression, his face as still as a deep well, letting the whispers spread without reacting. On the green bird, the headmaster of Taitsong Academy smiled as he looked at the buzzing square and said, "Does anyone have any objections to this hunting war? If not, we shall open the Spirit Light Realm." The Spirit Light Realm was the hunting ground, a unique space created by Northern Song Spiritual Academy. Every year, the hunting war took place within this Spirit Light Realm. Countless students exchanged looks before reluctantly nodding. It seemed Shen Cangsheng wouldn't be coming. With that, they had little chance of overcoming the final trial. The 3 generals were well known, not only within Northern Song Spiritual Academy, but also across the Northern Song continent. The headmaster of Taitsong saw this and smiled faintly, waving his sleeve. The space ahead of him began to distort, and as the light shimmered, a massive spatial portal slowly took shape, emanating a peculiar and vast spiritual energy fluctuation. The time has come. The hunting war of this year shall begin now. As the headmaster of Taitsong saw the portal open, his clear and melodious laughter echoed in everyone's ears. Countless students nodded, their eyes flickering with excitement. No matter what, giving up before reaching the final stage was not the style of students from Northern Azure Academy. Even though this year's hunting war lacked a powerhouse like Shen Cangsheng, they would still try to break through the last hurdle. However, just as the countless students were preparing to leap into the spirit light realm, a sudden whistling sound of wind broke through from the distant rear. A surge of astonishing spiritual energy rose into the sky. Hee hee, how could I miss the hunting war? At the moment when the overwhelming spiritual energy fluctuation appeared, a voice filled with laughter also rang out, like thunder, rumbling and finally echoing throughout the plaza. Is that Senior Shen Cangsheng? He's finally back. The entire plaza almost exploded in excitement in an instant, with countless students' faces filled with joy as they couldn't help but cheer. At the final moment, the tyrant of the heavenly ranking had arrived just in time. Amidst the deafening cheers, a stream of light dashed from the distance, finally appearing in the sky. As the light faded, a young man in black stood in midair, his aura imposing, like an eagle soaring in the sky, catching everyone's attention. Countless gazes were filled with awe as they looked at the towering figure. In the hearts of the students of Northern Azure Academy, Shen Cangsheng was undoubtedly the true tyrant. His position on the heavenly ranking, number 1, was still unbeaten to this day. Finally appearing, huh? Li Xiantong stared at the black-clad figure in the sky, smiling faintly. A strong battle intent surged in his eyes. If this hunting war lacked Shen Cangsheng, it would have been rather dull. Is that Senior Shen Cangsheng? Zhou Ling, Yi Qingling, and the others watched the figure with curiosity and reverence. After arriving at Northern Azure Academy, they had heard too much about the legend of this heavenly ranking overlord. Chen nodded slightly. He looked at the figure and then at the nearly boiling atmosphere. In today's Northern Azure Academy, only Shen Cangsheng could wield such immense influence, almost like a flag bearer. Even Li Xiantong, a genius who was similarly admired, could not compare to him in this regard. Headmaster, am I late? Shen Cangsheng stood in midair, looking toward the headmaster of Taicang, who was perched on a blue bird, and asked with a smile. The headmaster of Taicang also smiled, glancing at him. He was naturally very familiar with this outstanding student of Northern Azure Academy and said, "Didn't you take the bounty mission to hunt down the Devil Dragon Child? Did you finish the mission and return?" At these words, many students trembled in shock. The Devil Dragon Child? The second most dangerous figure on the bounty list? Shen Cangsheng chuckled helplessly and replied, "I fought with him a few times, but he managed to escape each time. Once I participate in this hunting war and undergo the spirit light baptism, I should be able to deal with him." His tone was casual, but it made many of the top students from Northern Azure Academy change their expressions slightly. Had Shen Cangsheng already reached such a level? How could they possibly catch up? The heavenly ranking tyrant truly lived up to his reputation. Li Xuantong's eyes narrowed slightly, but the battle intent in them remained undiminished, even growing stronger. Li Xiantong, long time no see. Why do you just stare at me like this? Sensing Li Xuantong's gaze, Shen Cangsheng turned his head and smiled. "I just wanted to see how much you've progressed. Don't let me catch up to you too easily," Li Xiantong replied with a faint smile. "Haha, I'm also looking forward to seeing if your heavenly Shen divine art has improved." Shen Cangsheng nodded and smiled. On the heavenly ranking, the only person he truly regarded was Li Xiantong. As for figures like He Yao, they didn't catch his attention too much. Shen Cangsheng smiled, his casual gaze sweeping over He Yao, Su Huang, and other prominent figures from the top 10 of the heavenly ranking. But when his gaze landed on Chen, he froze for a moment, then looked at him deeply with a meaningful expression. Shen Cangsheng clearly had a strong impression of Chen. After all, back then, with just the heaven-merging stage's strength, Chen had slain Bai Xian and remained calm in front of the Devil Dragon Child. Chen glanced at Shen Cangsheng, offering a slight smile, but didn't speak. "Since the one you've been waiting for has arrived, let's begin," said the headmaster of Taicang Academy with a grin, his eyes scanning the students whose expressions had clearly relaxed. It was evident that Shen Cangsheng's arrival had instilled more confidence in many of them. As his words echoed through the air, the space portal suddenly erupted with a burst of countless rays of light. "Haha, everyone, let's move. Li Xiantong, see you at the radiant platform?" Shen Cangsheng's voice rang out in laughter. With a single step, his figure transformed into a streak of light, rushing into the massive portal. His laughter reverberated through the plaza. Boom! Shen Cangsheng's actions instantly ignited the entire plaza. Numerous figures shot up into the air, resembling a swarm of locusts as they streaked across the sky, blocking out the sun, and rushed into the enormous portal. Li Xiantong immediately followed, leading a group toward the shining portal. "We'll move as well," Mu Chen said, looking at Luo Li, who nodded slightly in response. "Mu Gu, do your best." Behind them, several members of the Luo God Society waved their fists excitedly and cheered. Mu Chen waved back at them, grabbing Luo Li's delicate hand, and in an instant, his figure shot forward, merging into the sea of people and rushing toward the spirit light realm. On the back of a Qingniao, Headmaster Taicong watched the spectacular scene with a smile before turning his gaze to the vast light mirror suspended in midair. There, the spirit light realm's endpoint, the radiant platform, was illuminated, guarded by the three generals. Hee, this hunting war just got interesting. I wonder, will the former top three of the heavenly ranking be more formidable, or will the current third place outshine them? Several elders behind him chuckled lightly at his words. Although the students were bursting with momentum, bolstered by talents like Shen Cangsheng and Li Xiantong, challenging the position of the three generals was still a long shot. If the hunting war went awry, they might end up empty-handed. This was a strange, somewhat chaotic world. The sky was dim, yet this seemingly disorderly realm radiated terrifying amounts of worldly spiritual energy. Due to the overwhelming energy, one could see spiritual clouds floating in the sky, occasionally releasing some moist spiritual mist that drifted through the air. This was the Spirit Light Realm, a peculiar space created by the Northern Song Spiritual Academy and the venue for the hunting war. The space was abundant in spiritual energy but lacked vitality. The world was eerily quiet, devoid of any human presence. However, that silence was about to be shattered. Beams of light, like swarming locusts, descended from the sky, scattering toward the outermost edges of the space. Though the Spirit Light Realm wasn't vast, in relative terms, it far exceeded the Northern Song Spiritual Academy's domain. Even with a large number of students entering, they were spread out, making their presence still quite sparse. On a small hill, two beams of light shot down, coalescing into two figures, Mu Chen and Luo Li. They appeared, both of them curiously observing the Spirit Light Realm, and then both let out a soft exclamation. The spiritual energy here is so rich. Judging by their estimates, the spiritual energy in this realm could rival that of the Northern Song Spiritual Academy's 7th grade spirit gathering array. But the most frightening thing was that while the 7th grade array was impressive, it was no match for the scale of this space. However, there's no vitality. Mu Chen quickly noted the flaw. Despite the overwhelming spiritual energy, there were no signs of life or natural fluctuations. This space was only recently opened, so it can't generate vitality, nor can it sustain life for long, Luo Li remarked as her beautiful eyes scanned the area. Mu Chen nodded slightly. No wonder the Northern Song Spiritual Academy didn't allow students to cultivate here. It wasn't suitable for prolonged stays by living beings. We should get moving as well. Let's try to gather as much spirit light as possible, Mu Chen said. The effectiveness of the spirit light baptism depended on the amount of spirit light one could collect. If they gathered too little, the benefit from the baptism would be wasted. In this spirit light realm, there was only one way to obtain spirit light: by slaying spirit soldiers. Spirit soldiers were humanoid beings formed from the condensation of worldly spiritual energy. According to the information Mu Chen knew, in the spiritual light realm, spirit soldiers were divided into 3 levels. The lowest tier consisted of ordinary spirit soldiers, who possessed power comparable to that of the heaven merging stage. The second tier were the spirit generals, whose strength was at the heaven transformation stage. Some particularly powerful spirit generals could even rival those in the late stages of the heaven transformation stage. This type of spirit general was favored by many capable students, as the spirit light they yielded was of the highest quality. As for the strongest spirit soldiers, they were called spirit kings. There were not many of them in the spiritual light realm, but they were extremely formidable. If one encountered them, the only option was to quickly retreat. Each spirit king not only possessed simple consciousness, but also strength on par with a heaven-reaching stage expert, making them incredibly tough opponents. In recent hunting wars, very few dared to provoke a spirit king. Though the spirit light within them was the best material for spirit light baptism, The terrifying strength they wielded, comparable to the heaven-reaching stage, made most people avoid them out of caution. Let's go. Chen assessed the direction, then swiftly took the lead. He didn't have a clear target in mind, but knew they simply needed to head deep into the spiritual light realm. All the participants in the hunting war would eventually converge there, where the final guardians awaited. They were the ultimate opponents. The two of them soared through the sky. Due to the dense spiritual energy in the spiritual light realm, their speed was slightly suppressed. The constant pressure around them required them to keep circulating their spiritual energy to resist it. Chen and Luoli flew low, and after about 10 minutes, Chen's gaze sharpened, and their speed slowed. Ahead, there was a dazzling light. He squinted his eyes and saw what seemed to be a figure. It was floating, emanating a powerful spiritual aura. When Chen sensed it, the figure seemed to react to the different fluctuations. It immediately shot toward them, moving like a ghost with incredible speed. Not bad speed-wise. Chen smiled slightly. With a flick of his toes, he shot forward and past the figure. However, in the moment of crossing, his palm flashed and struck the figure's chest. Violent spiritual energy burst forth, instantly shattering it. As the figure shattered, a faint red light shot out from within. Before it could disperse, Chen's hand reached out and caught it. The faint red light gradually shrank in Chen's palm, eventually turning into a red, the size of a longan. Inside the dot was an exceptionally pure form of worldly spiritual energy. Is this spirit light? Chen curiously toyed with the red dot in his hand. He clicked his tongue in amazement. The spiritual energy contained in such a small form was incredibly pure. Truly, the world was wondrous. It's just an ordinary spirit soldier, Luoli said. The spirit light was too weak, and for their spirit light baptism, it was merely a drop in the ocean. They needed to find stronger spirit generals. Let's keep looking. Chen sighed. It was their first time participating in the hunting war, and they were not familiar with the area. Obviously, others wouldn't be so kind as to share such valuable information. Luoli smiled and nodded. She was not in a hurry. As long as she was with him, she didn't mind if they didn't gain much this time. Of course, while she didn't mind, Chen couldn't afford to ignore it. He knew how important time was for Luoli. He could still be by her side, so he was determined to use every method to grow stronger, hoping that when they returned to the Luo God clan, she would have an easier life. Let's check ahead. He looked forward and took Luoli's hand, flying forward. However, in the next hour, their harvest wasn't substantial. They only encountered about 10 ordinary spirit soldiers, and the spirit light they obtained was far from impressive. Chen felt a little helpless. Were spirit soldiers in this realm really so rare? How were they supposed to conduct the spirit light baptism? With a flick of his finger, Chen destroyed a flying spirit soldier and grabbed the faint red that came out. He couldn't help but pout. TCH, another ordinary spirit soldier. He was slightly speechless. After 2 or 3 hours, their harvest had been disappointing. There's a fluctuation of spiritual energy ahead, but it's not from spirit soldiers. It must be from the students participating in the hunting war. Just like us, Luoli suddenly looked into the distance, her eyes filled with surprise. Chen showed little interest. He was troubled, wondering how he could gather more spirit light. This was his first time bringing Luoli to train, and if he returned empty-handed, it would be of no use. This spirit light realm must have its own rules. This is our first time here, and all the information is unfamiliar. So the priority is to resolve the information issue, Luoli smiled. Chen froze for a moment before smiling back. We do have some spirit light. If worst comes to worst, we can exchange it for information. If they still refuse, then they can't blame us for not being reasonable, right? Hearing the last sentence, Luoli couldn't help but roll her eyes at him, her gaze charming and playful. Chen, however, became excited. He and Luoli quickly shot forward, and within just 10 minutes, they reached a hill in the distance where a battle was erupting. What surprised him, though, was that this battle was not between students and spirit soldiers, but rather an internal fight between the students. It appeared that over 10 students were besieging 3 figures. Clearly, those 3 were losing. In the face of such a siege, They were increasingly struggling, on the verge of collapse. And Ran, we don't want to make things difficult for you. Tell us the direction of the spirit soldier gathering point, and we'll let you go. A lean youth standing outside the battle zone, observing the increasingly helpless three, chuckled. One of the three figures being attacked was Ran, who Mu Chun had met when he first entered the Northern Azure Spirit Academy. Lu Chun, you're dreaming. And Ran's face turned crimson with anger. She gritted her silver teeth and said, You disgusting bastard. Even if I'm kicked out of the hunting war, I won't tell you the gathering point. I don't believe you dare to kill me here. Lu Chun, the youth in question, sneered at her words. His gaze swept over Ran's shapely figure, and he leered, I might not dare to kill you, but Ran, we're all men here. If things get out of hand during the fight, and I happen to touch you, don't hold it against me. After all, you can't report me for that, can you? And Ran's face turned pale with fury, her body trembling with rage. So, Ran, why make things unpleasant? Just tell us the location, and we can even bring you along. We'll share the spirit light we hunt. What do you think of this proposal? Lu Chen grinned, his tone dripping with malice. And Ran gritted her teeth. Beside her stood two other girls, who were also blushing with anger in the face of Lu Chen's rogue threats, but they had no means to fight back. Heh, I don't think your proposal is worth considering. Just as Ran was about to speak, a sudden burst of laughter rang out from a short distance away. Two figures shot over and appeared in front of them. Mu Chun? And Ran stared at the handsome young man in front of her and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Mu Chun? The students attacking Ran turned their gazes toward the familiar name, their expressions changing as a strong sense of caution filled their eyes. Though Mu Chun had only been at the Northern Azure Spirit Academy for a few months, his reputation was already greater than some of the senior students. Lu Chen's face also changed slightly as he glared at Mu Chun and Luoli. You two, this has nothing to do with you. Why interfere? If you're willing, once I get the information, I can share it with you. Maybe we can even cooperate later. Though Lu Chun was wary of Mu Chun, he didn't want to let Ran go. In the hunting war, time was of the essence, and information was crucial. If they couldn't find the spirit soldier gathering point soon, they wouldn't be able to collect enough spirit light, which would render the spirit light baptism ineffective. He was also at the quasi-spirit transformation stage, and with their numbers, he believed Mu Chen and Luoli wouldn't have an easy time dealing with them all. And Ran, hearing this, gritted her silver teeth and said, Mu Chun, help us, and I'll give you the information. She hated Lu Chun so much that she would rather give the information to Mu Chun than let this bastard have it. Mu Chun smiled faintly and turned to Lu Chun. Ran is my friend. His relationship with Ran wasn't particularly deep. It was simply that he didn't like Lu Chun in front of him. Moreover, the strength of Lu Chun and his companions wasn't at a level that would make Mu Chun feel threatened. With that in mind, he naturally acted according to his preferences. You. Upon hearing this, Lu Chen's eyes flashed with fury, and his face darkened. He quickly exchanged a look with the dozen or so companions behind him. Immediately, they withdrew from the encirclement around Ran and the other two girls, now turning their hostile gazes toward Mu Chun. Leave him to me. You handle the others. Mu Chun spoke softly to Luoli. Got it. Luoli nodded slightly. The strongest among these opponents was only at the late heaven-merging stage. She felt no pressure at all. You two think you can take on so many of us? Lu Chun gritted his teeth and sneered. But before his voice even finished, Mu Chun had already shot out like a lightning bolt. Stop him! Lu Chun shouted as his spiritual energy erupted from within him. The dozen or so companions also unleashed their spiritual power, but before they could act, Mu Chen's figure suddenly transformed into a blur of light. A low dragon-like roar seemed to reverberate through the air. Whoosh! The light moved with an indescribable speed, effortlessly bypassing their obstruction. Before Lu Chun could react, a slender hand was already gently pressing against his chest. Lu Chun stared at the specter-like Mu Chun who appeared before him. His pupils contracted in shock. The speed of the latter was terrifying. Boom! A violent surge of spiritual energy erupted from Mu Chen's palm, and Lu Chen's body was sent flying as if struck by a massive hammer. He skidded along the ground, leaving a long trail before crashing into a giant rock. The rock shattered, and the unlucky man was knocked unconscious. He had thought that with his quasi-spirit transformation stage strength, he would at least be able to exchange a few blows with Mu Chen. But who would have thought that despite being at the same quasi-spirit transformation stage, the gap between them was as vast as heaven and earth. Boom, boom. As Mu Chen effortlessly dispatched Lu Chen, a series of rapid spiritual energy fluctuations came from behind. Mu Chen turned around to see that the unlucky dozen or so people had all fallen to the ground, crying out in pain. Among them, a girl dressed in dark robes like ink smiled and clapped her hands. She then gave Mu Chen a playful wink with her clear, bright eyes. Impressive. Mu Chen gave a thumbs up and chuckled, then turned to the three girls beside him. And Ran, are you all right? And Ran shook her head, her gaze a little complex as she looked at Mu Chen and Luoli. Just a few months ago, Mu Chen had only been at the Divine Soul stage. Yet who could have imagined that in such a short time, this freshman had already surpassed her by leaps and bounds. The two other young women beside Ran, both also quite beautiful, were quietly sizing up Mu Chen, likely curious about this rising star in the Northern Song Spiritual Academy. So, what exactly is this gathering point? Mu Chen didn't waste time with unnecessary words and went straight to the point. What he needed most now was information about the Spirit Light Realm. In the Spirit Light Realm, although the worldly spiritual energy is abundant, the formation of spirit soldiers isn't so easy. In ordinary places, it's hard to find large numbers of high-level spirit soldiers and spirit generals, and Ran explained clearly. She knew Mu Chen was helping her partly because she had this valuable information. She stopped sighing and continued, however, due to certain terrain features, some areas give rise to a large number of spirit soldiers, and we refer to those places as gathering points. Only by finding these gathering points can you gather a large amount of spirit light. Otherwise, no matter how much you search through the spirit light realm, the harvest will be minimal. Mu Chen and Luoli both suddenly understood. No wonder they had only encountered scattered spirit soldiers on their journey. It seemed there was a pattern to this in the spirit light realm. Where did you get the information about these gathering points, and Ran? Mu Chen asked in surprise. Actually, this kind of information can be bought at the Spirit Value Hall, but the price is extremely high. Moreover, these gathering points change every year, so no one can guarantee that the information bought will always be accurate. The spiritual value I used to buy the information was pooled together by the three of us, and Ran said with a wry smile. Who knew that Lu Chen and his group would find out, and this is what happened. You can buy it at the Spirit Value Hall? Mu Chen was stunned and then sighed. I'll give you the location of the gathering point. And Ran's expression dimmed slightly, but she did not forget her previous promise. This time, she could only accept her misfortune. The two girls beside her let out soft sighs. Their strength was ultimately too weak. In this hunting war, where dark horses emerged one after another, it was nearly impossible for them to achieve any results. Seeing the three disheartened yet beautiful girls in front of him, Mu Chen couldn't help but let out a helpless smile. Why did he suddenly feel a slight sense of guilt? Xun'er and Ran, we're just freshmen and unfamiliar with the spiritual light realm. How about you lead the way for us? We don't intend to take all the spoils for ourselves. When we obtain the spirit light, we can split it evenly. The three girls were momentarily stunned before swiftly lifting their heads to stare at Mu Chen, their eyes filled with surprise. Are you serious? Generally speaking, no one would complain about having too much spirit light, as the more one possessed, the greater the benefits during the spirit light baptism. Yet now, Mu Chen was willing to share the spirit light with them despite his absolute advantage in strength. He had no obligation to offer them such generosity. Mu Chen simply responded with a warm smile. He understood the importance of spirit light, but he also believed that one should take only what was fair. Otherwise, he would be no different from Lu Chen and his kind. Quite the gentleman, aren't you? Luoli tilted her head slightly, a faint teasing smile playing at her lips. Mu Chen could only reply with an awkward, helpless smile. Xun'er and Ran, lead the way. We need to hurry. Mu Chen turned to the three girls, who were still in a state of pleasant surprise, and urged, All right. And Ran nodded quickly, identified the correct direction, and took the lead. Chen and the others immediately followed. Chen, the gathering point we know of, was obtained from intelligence purchased from the Spirit Value Hall. That means other students might have bought the same information, and Ran explained as they sped toward their destination. You mean other students may be targeting this gathering point as well? Chen frowned slightly. It seemed that obtaining spirit light in the hunting grounds wouldn't be so easy after all. It's possible. And Ran wasn't entirely certain. If no one else showed up, they could claim it for themselves. But if others did, things could get complicated. If the other party was strong enough, they might even force them out. We'll deal with it when we get there. Chen thought for a moment before responding. Given his current strength, coupled with Luo Li's presence, he wasn't particularly concerned. If someone tried to use force against them, he wouldn't mind returning the favor in kind. Seeing Chen's calm demeanor, without a trace of worry, and Ran quietly exhaled in relief. It was clear that Chen was no longer the same inexperienced freshman he had once been. The journey continued in relative silence. Along the way, they encountered many other students, but each group maintained their vigilance, quickly leaving without any interactions. After about half an hour of travel, Chen noticed that Ran was slowing down. We're almost there. Her voice carried a hint of excitement. Chen's gaze sharpened as he looked into the distance, where he sensed distinct fluctuations of heaven and earth spiritual energy. A few minutes later, they landed on a mountain peak. Their eyes were drawn to the landscape ahead. A depression nestled between several mountains, shimmering with dazzling light. Countless glowing figures hovered within, emanating powerful waves of spiritual energy. The sheer number was staggering, at least in the thousands. So many spirit soldiers? Chen's expression grew solemn as he gazed at the overwhelming horde. Deeper in, there are even stronger ones, Luo Li murmured, her beautiful eyes locked onto the core of the gathering point. Chen followed her gaze and immediately noticed several, exceptionally large figures within the depths. Powerful spiritual energy radiated from them, far surpassing that of the surrounding spirit soldiers. His eyes narrowed. Those were spirit generals. Within the vast hollow of the mountains, spiritual light shimmered like an ocean, with countless luminous figures drifting within. The spirit soldiers here probably number in the thousands. If we were to replace them with humans of comparable strength, it would be the equivalent of having 1,000 individuals at the mid-heaven merging stage. If they were to unite, even someone at the heaven transformation stage would be obliterated. Fortunately, these spirit soldiers lack intelligence. Otherwise, Chen and the others would have had to run as far away as possible by now. So many spirit soldiers, and Ran and the others stared in astonishment at the scene before them. Then, Ran couldn't help but look at Chen. How are we supposed to make a move? Chen furrowed his brows. In addition to these numerous spirit soldiers, there were clearly spirit generals lurking deeper within, whose strength could rival that of the heaven transformation stage. This place was essentially a small army. We're too few, Luo Li said with a slight frown. We may not be able to handle this. Even though these spirit soldiers lacked intelligence, the sheer number of them, coupled with their ability to unleash basic attacks through spiritual energy, was already formidable. And here, there were only 5 of them. The strongest combatants were herself and Chen. But relying on just the 2 of them to face this overwhelming number of spirit soldiers, and the spirit general hidden deep within would cause them tremendous strain. Engaging in a battle that would drain so much of their energy was, clearly, not a wise move. Moreover, Luo Li's glass-like eyes swept across the surrounding mountains. She spoke softly, "We're not the only ones eyeing this place." She could vaguely sense some hidden auras. It was evident that they weren't the only ones to discover this gathering point. However, the others who had discovered this place seemed just like them, lacking the ability to deal with such a large number of spirit soldiers. Chen nodded. He, too, had noticed the hidden fluctuations of spiritual energy. His eyes flickered slightly as he gazed at the mountains. Then, he smiled faintly, and his deep voice echoed through the air. "Everyone, why hide? There are a lot of spirit soldiers here, and none of us can take them all on alone. Since that's the case, why not collaborate?" His voice reverberated through the mountains, but the spirit soldiers in the vast ravines remained still. Without any consciousness, they weren't even considered living beings. They were more like a condensed form of worldly spiritual energy. Therefore, Mu Chen wasn't concerned about alarming them. After Mu Chen's voice faded, the mountains fell silent for a few minutes. Then, the sound of wind breaking the air could be heard as figures flashed out from hidden spots, floating mid-air. The number was also considerable, around a dozen. These people formed distinct circles, clearly indicating that each had their own team. Mu Chen's gaze swept over the people suspended in mid-air. He couldn't help but be a little surprised. Among these groups, he could sense the presence of individuals at the mid-heaven transformation stage. Though they were in the early stage, it was still enough to prove their strength. Looks like the hunting war is pushing people's strength to new heights, Mu Chen thought to himself. Normally, those at the early heaven transformation stage could break into the top 20 of the heavenly ranking, but with so many now in the early heaven transformation stage, that would no longer be enough. From now on, entering the top 20 would likely require much more. I am Mu Chen. May I know how to address everyone? Mu Chen cupped his hands and smiled. Upon hearing his name, the others glanced at Mu Chen with some surprise. His name wasn't unfamiliar in the Northern Azure Academy. Heh, so it's the famous Mu Chen. I've heard much about you, said Lin Feng, the leader of a team of about 10 people, smiling and cupping his hands. Lu Zhan, said another young leader, bowing his hands. Chen Peng, a lean young man, nodded with a hint of arrogance on his face. These three were the leaders of the three teams, and they were the strongest among their groups, all having reached the early heaven transformation stage. No wonder they commanded the respect of those behind them. Mu Chen smiled faintly and said, I think everyone understands. There are too many spirit soldiers here for any one of us to handle alone. Why not cooperate, split the spoils, and each take what we can? What do you think? The three leaders' eyes flickered at his words. Lin Feng and Lu Zhan didn't object, but Chen Peng, the leader of the third team, looked Mu Chen up and down before shaking his head. This gathering point was discovered by us first. You come here and want to take a share? Among these three teams, Chen Peng's team has the largest number of members, and their strength is probably the most formidable as well. Originally, they planned to gradually take control of the spirit soldiers here, but they never expected to be discovered by the other two teams, which led to a covert standoff. However, they didn't anticipate that Mu Chen would suddenly appear, and from the looks of it, he seemed to want a share of the spirit soldiers as well. Although he had heard of Mu Chen, Chen Peng wasn't overly concerned. With Mu Chen's strength at the early heaven transformation stage, he was considered excellent in the Northern Song Spiritual Academy. Plus, Mu Chen had a strong backing. Chen Peng wasn't willing to share this cake so easily. Hearing the disdain in his words, Ran and the other two women were somewhat angry, but due to his formidable strength, they dared not speak out. Then what does brother Chen Peng intend to do? Mu Chen smiled faintly, his black eyes hiding any emotions. Let's do this, Chen Peng said. Seeing as you've worked hard to come here, you can assist us. Once we've wiped out all the spirit soldiers, we'll give you 100 beams of spirit light. How does that sound? 100 beams of spirit light? Mu Chen raised an eyebrow, then chuckled lightly. It seems brother Chen Peng doesn't think we have the strength or qualification to participate in this division. Chen Peng didn't comment, but quietly circulated his spiritual energy. He was proud, but also cautious. Mu Chen appeared to only have the strength of the quasi-spirit transformation stage, but rumors had it that even those in the early heaven transformation stage couldn't handle him. However, they had the advantage in numbers. If they fought, they could easily crush his team. Mu Chen smiled faintly, and Luo Li stepped forward gently. As soon as Chen Peng saw Luo Li's movement, his body tensed, and the dozen or so people behind him immediately took a defensive stance, showing good battle experience and teamwork. If you can take one strike from me, we'll become free cannon fodder for you, Luo Li said, her jade hand slowly gripping the sword hilt. Her crystal-clear eyes locked onto Chen Peng, and her voice was calm and steady. Such arrogance! Chen Peng sneered angrily. Swish! Before his laughter could fully fade, Luo Li had already thrust her sword. A tremendous sword energy shot out, bright like a dazzling light. In an instant, it tore through the sky. A deep sword scar shot forward from in front of Luo Li. When the shocking sword energy surged forward, Chen Peng's face changed drastically. But, being no fool, he quickly shouted and his spiritual energy surged, forming a spiritual barrier in front of him. Sizzle! Just as the spiritual barrier took shape, the brilliant sword energy was already upon him. The barrier rippled violently and then, to Chen Peng's horror, was torn apart. A blood mark appeared across Chen Peng's face, even severing some of his hair, leaving him looking quite disheveled. The dozen or so people behind him saw that he couldn't even block a single strike. Their faces instantly changed. They looked at Luo Li, who had calmly sheathed her sword and stepped back behind Mu Chen, with shocked gazes. Lin Feng and Lu Zhan, who had been watching from the side, also narrowed their eyes, their expressions unusually serious. They hadn't expected this stunning young woman to be so formidable. Now, do you have any objections? Mu Chen looked once more at the uncertain Chen Peng, his voice light. However, the cold gleam in his black eyes gathered. If Chen Peng still failed to understand, Mu Chen would have no choice but to take more forceful action. Chen Peng gritted his teeth slightly, but he wasn't a fool. Although Mu Chen's team was small, the displayed strength was enough to intimidate them. All right, he said. Since Mu Chen and his team have the strength and qualifications to share a piece of the pie, if I continue to block them, I'll just be asking for trouble. Heh, Mu Chen, you truly live up to your reputation. The one even Li Xianong couldn't handle, Lin Feng said with a smile. We have no objections to your proposal. Neither do we, Lu Zhan nodded. Mu Chen smiled faintly and said, in that case, let's cooperate happily. Mu Chen's gaze shifted toward the vast mountain valley, where the spirit light rippled like an ocean. A flicker of heat passed through his eyes. If they could deal with these spirit soldiers, it would undoubtedly be a huge gain. Everyone, prepare to move. The longer we wait, the more people will likely notice us here. Mu Chen smiled and his spiritual energy surged outward, like black smoke rising straight into the sky. Lin Feng, Lu Zhan, Chen Peng, and the others also responded, circulating their spiritual energy within their bodies. The mighty spiritual energy fluctuations immediately spread across the land. At the same time, as Mu Chen and the others prepared to wipe out this gathering point, a few indifferent gazes from a hidden location deep within the mountains locked onto them. Heh, big brother, they're about to make their move. Are we just going to watch? A laughter echoed. Lin Feng and the others are no big deal, but that Mu Chen and Luo Li, the new recruits, are a bit tricky. Heh, but it's no problem. The three of us have been holding back for so long. It's time to show our strength. After this hunting war, the top 10 of the heavenly ranking will surely see the three of us occupy 3 of the spots. Another voice chuckled lightly. Before them stood a tall, slender figure. His eyes cold and detached as he gazed toward the valley, his voice carrying a hint of both chill and mockery. Let them deal with the spirit soldiers first. By then, we'll only need to mop up the leftovers and leave behind 100 spirit lights as a token of gratitude.